In the Ukraine war, both Russia and Ukraine get by with a little help from their friends. For Ukraine, that means support from a slew of Western partners who have sent billions of dollars of military aid to the country. But for Russia, it means grasping onto any possible ally that can help, even if that means putting itself in a position where it owes favors later, or it angers those allies so much that they up and leave. Guess what just happened? Two of those former allies are out. Vladimir Putin has been left humiliated as Armenia distances itself and Azerbaijan looks west, dumping Russia for the US. And believe it, this breakup is going to sting Russia's leader. Why? Because Russia has spent so long pitting these two countries against one another that the only person Putin has to blame for losing them is himself. On August 21, Euromaidan Press reported that Armenia and Azerbaijan are on the verge of signing a deal. This isn't any old agreement. It has nothing to do with trade or military alliances. This deal is all about creating peace between a pair of nations that have been fighting each other on and off for around 3 decades. And if the deal is ratified, it will be the end of a massive border contest that has left both nations vulnerable to Russia's whims for far too long. This is bad for Putin. Russia's leader, who loves to think of himself as a master manipulator in the geopolitical sphere, is facing Armenia breaking away and Azerbaijan shifting west, two countries that were allies of Russia until very recently. And he's losing them because both of those countries have examined their problems and come to the same conclusion. Russia is behind everything. To understand how these two countries came to that conclusion, first take a brief look at the convoluted recent history between Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Russia. At various points over the last 30 years, Russia has tried to wear every hat it could when dealing with these two countries. It's acted as a peacemaker, arms dealer, negotiator, and intimidator, often in equal measure, to keep two nations that are both former Soviet states under the Russian thumb. Much of Russia's attempts to control these two countries hinges on Nagorno-Karabakh. Created as a Soviet oblast in 1923, that region was 95% ethnically Armenian, the Council on Foreign Relations says, and it's basically been a tinderbox of conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan since the Soviet Union's dissolution. Russia has tried to solve the Nagorno-Karabakh problem several times before, always with one eye turned toward how these solutions can benefit Russia. For instance, Russia negotiated a ceasefire between Armenia and Azerbaijan in 1994 that ostensibly ended a 6-year First Karabakh War, which left Nagorno-Karabakh a de facto unrecognized entity heavily reliant on Armenia. Armenia, of course, being a Russian ally that was itself pretty dependent on maintaining a good relationship with Moscow. That ceasefire held until September 2020, albeit with intermittent patches of fighting. Then it exploded. Fighting, attempted negotiations, and ceasefire breakdowns marked the next few months, though Russia again got involved in November 2020 by brokering a new deal that would see Russian peacekeepers serve on a new strip of land named the Lachin Corridor. All was right in the world for Russia at that point. It had managed to get its soldiers into a strip of land separating two countries it was trying to control. And if those countries weakened themselves, making them both more reliant on Russia in the process, that was great. Putin must have been rubbing his hands with glee. And who knows, one or the other, or perhaps even both, of Azerbaijan and Armenia might one day request to become part of the Russian Federation to solve their problems. Of the two nations, Armenia was the one that Russia backed most. As A's media reported on August 21, Russia essentially handed victory to Armenia when it negotiated the first ceasefire mentioned before from the 1990s. Throughout the decade, the outlet says, Russia also empowered Armenia by supporting its militaristic ambitions. By 1998, Russia had shipped $1 billion of arms to Armenia, nullifying Azerbaijan's efforts to obtain a fair peace. There wasn't much that Azerbaijan could do about any of this. At the same time, Russia also sold major arms to Azerbaijan and cultivated ties, and the relationship fluctuated. As the Carnegie Endowment noted, as recently as May 2024, Azerbaijan was an essential partner for Russia, both in terms of energy exports and because it was able to provide a vital transport corridor to Iran. This playing of both sides couldn't last forever. and it ended up being the Nagorno-Karabakh region that Russia was using to control Armenia and Azerbaijan that eventually blew up in Putin's face. Fighting exploded in the region in late 2023, and Russia's peacekeepers, who were still stationed there, did practically nothing to stop it. Azerbaijan retook Nagorno-Karabakh in September 2023, while Russian peacekeepers didn't intervene after Armenia had already indicated in May 2023 it would recognize Azerbaijan's territorial integrity, including Nagorno-Karabakh, conditional on rights guarantees. The Washington Post described this as a striking failure of Russia's peacekeeping role and a pivot away from Armenia. Weakened already by the Ukraine war, Russia couldn't afford to spare troops that could respond to Azerbaijani attacks, and the capitulation in 2023 was limited to Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenia later returned 4 border villages to Azerbaijan in April-May 2024 through negotiations, a separate process leading Armenia to ask a question. Where on earth was its Russian ally? Russia was nowhere to be seen, not only because of the Ukraine war, but also because it didn't want to anger Azerbaijan due to the crucial support it was offering related to energy and Iran. So Armenia was left in the cold, with the best Putin could hope for being that a new regional order would emerge in the Caucasus region of which Russia could grab a stake. Putin would have been happy to watch both sides destroy each other, allowing Russia to roll in with a campaign of influence that saw Putin position himself as the savior of both. However, almost 2 years after the Nagorno-Karabakh tinderbox exploded again, both Armenia and Azerbaijan first fought and then seemed to come to the joint conclusion that they needed to find a way to create peace. Vitally, that peace couldn't involve Russia. And that leads back to the peace deal Armenia and Azerbaijan are on the verge of signing. The wheels of that deal were put in motion on July 10 when the Armenian Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan, met with Azerbaijan's President, Ilham Aliyev, in Abu Dhabi. The two leaders came close to agreeing on a deal there and then, though a couple of hitches ended up stopping it from happening. Still, a dialogue had been opened. In a July 25 article, the conversation said that Armenia and Azerbaijan were preparing for a major reset in their relationship, the likes of which Russia would never have allowed. But even as late as July 25, the outlet speculated that any deal the two countries made would still need to involve Russia in some way. In the cases of Armenia and Azerbaijan, economic ties, transport links, and human connections still favor relationship with Russia. So, a temporary breakdown in political relations can be mended if all three leaders demonstrate enough statesmanship to sail through the troubled waters, the outlet said, with the third leader in this equation being Putin. The conversation also pointed out that Armenia and Azerbaijan have remained close trading partners with Russia throughout the Ukraine war, with both also being dependent on remittance income from their nationals who are living in Russia. Remittance income is a term for money that migrant workers send back home to their families, meaning both Armenian and Azerbaijani nationals have been propping up their nation's economies with money earned in Russia. So, even toward the end of last month, all roads seem to point back to Putin. But Armenia and Azerbaijan found another route. Rather than allowing a peace between the two nations to hinge on the involvement of a Russian nation that is more than happy to sow seeds of discord and then wait for an opportune time to build its influence, the two countries found another country to help them broker their peace, and it just so happened to be the last country that Putin would have wanted, the United States. On August 9, The Guardian reported that the leaders of both Armenia and Azerbaijan signed a peace agreement in the White House. That deal was brokered by the US, with President Donald Trump seeming to have played a pivotal role. So pivotal, in fact, that the new trade corridor that's being created as part of the deal is apparently being named after the American president. "I didn't ask for this," Trump said when that news broke, though he added that it was a great honor for me. Both the European Union and European Commission lauded the new deal, noting that it needed to be ratified as quickly as possible so both nations could proceed toward normalization. Iran was less happy. Though it welcomed the news of peace, The Guardian says that it also warned against other foreign nations getting involved in the deal. Translation: Iran wants to be involved and it isn't. Instead, Western nations seem to be benefiting from this peace far more than Iran, which used the Russian control over these two countries to profit. As for Putin, he was left out in the cold. The signing of a deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan, both former Soviet republics, also strikes a geopolitical blow to their former imperial master, Russia, the Guardian reports. Throughout the nearly 4-decade conflict, Moscow played mediator to expand its clout in the strategic South Caucasus region, but its influence waned quickly after it launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Once more, Putin's thirst for a war that never should have happened has come back to bite him. As for what the new peace deal contains, Euromaidan Press offers an outline. Both Armenia and Azerbaijan will offer each other mutual recognition of their sovereignty, which will be backed by a renunciation of the territorial claims that have caused so many problems over the last few decades. Border lines will be drawn up, though it still isn't clear who gets what, and that border will be demilitarized so that there's no tension created over it. But perhaps most important of all is an agreement on the creation of the new trade corridor mentioned earlier. Euromaidan Press says that the strip of land will be called the Zangezur Corridor, which conflicts with the Guardian's report that it will be the Trump route for international peace and prosperity. However, it's not the name that matters, it's what the corridor represents. First, it will provide Azerbaijan with a direct land link to its exclave of Nakhchivan, which it hasn't been able to reach easily thanks to its long-standing conflict with Armenia. And on the US side of the deal, America just so happens to have been granted the development rights to that trade corridor. Yet another blow to Putin's influence in the Caucasus. Iran won't like that US involvement either. Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty, or RFE-RL, reported on July 22, when the terms of this new peace deal were first being discussed. That new corridor cuts to the core of Iran's strategic calculations, RFE-RL says, as it means Iran no longer has a land route to the South Caucasus via Armenia, which forces it to rely on other foreign actors and Azerbaijan. The latter is unlikely to help Iran due to its ties with Russia, meaning there's a chance this deal could sour some in Iran to the Russian cause. As for the US and its new development exclusivity, that will likely see it getting paid handsomely for connecting the new corridor to several highways and railways, including one that links Azerbaijan to Turkey. Of course, building that infrastructure also enhances America's influence within two countries that have traditionally fallen under the old Soviet framework, which is a nice little knife to stick into Putin's side. Basically, what's happening here is every plan that Putin and his allies had for Armenia and Azerbaijan being turned on its head. Russia's leader had hoped that he could wait out the most recent conflict between the two nations before restoring Russia to its position as a nation on which both are forced to rely. Instead, his hesitance to get involved created a space into which the US could step. In the space of one Ukraine war, Putin has lost two countries. That irony will be returned to soon. But first, focus on what all of this means for Russia. Starting with Armenia, Euromaidan Press says that this new peace deal is the final nail in the coffin of its reliance on Russia for its security guarantees. That reliance was already crumbling after the Nagorno-Karabakh debacle, in which Russia essentially turned its back on its ally. Now, Putin isn't going to have a chance to worm his way back into Armenia's good graces. The US having development rights in the new trade corridor being created also means Armenia has all of the security guarantees that it needs. The same outlet also says that Armenia's biggest fear is that foreign forces, whomever they might be, could exploit the weakness that Russia displayed in Nagorno-Karabakh. After all, that's exactly what happened in Syria when Bashar al-Assad fell from power and fled, as rebels against his totalitarian regime dismantled his power base in a matter of weeks. Armenia needs somebody more reliable than Putin, whose Ukraine war tunnel vision has led to his ignoring Russia's concerns elsewhere. The Moscow Times likens the Armenia situation to a breakup between it and Russia, stating in a June 9 article that there's nothing that Putin can do to stop it. The trust was broken when Russia left Armenia to fend for itself in Nagorno-Karabakh. There's no coming back from that, or the several other times in 2021 and 2022 when Russia failed to protect Armenia's borders from Azerbaijani incursions that led to the deaths of hundreds of Armenian soldiers. It seems less like a breakup and more like Russia was running a protection racket that failed. It's only natural that Armenia would try to find another protector. Peace and a stronger relationship with the US combine to offer the protection it needs. As for Azerbaijan, the new deal marks a distancing from Russia. It's been trying to achieve that for a long time, despite the energy export and Iran links mentioned earlier in the video. The national interest offers several reasons why that shift had to happen. For one, Azerbaijan has been building closer ties with the EU as it stepped in to fill the gap left behind Europe pulling away from Russia for its energy once the Ukraine war started. Azerbaijan started building some pretty important ties at that point, and Russia was becoming a threat to them. Another reason, the same outlet says, is that Russia never really recognized Azerbaijan as a sovereign state. It still treated the country as though it's some kind of puppet state, still under the indirect rule of its Soviet masters. A lack of respect for the country's borders and overall terrible treatment by Russia only further added to Azerbaijan's desire to get away from Moscow. Russia had also downed Azerbaijani aircraft in the past, Euromaidan Press points out. It also hit the area around the Azerbaijani embassy in Kyiv with missiles. Yet more reasons to pull away and embrace the West. And with this new peace deal, peace with Armenia is accompanied by secure and predictable trade routes, as well as more direct links with Turkey and Azerbaijan's other allies. Is it any surprise then that these two nations cut Russia out of their peace deal at this point? The new deal is a win-win for both and a massive loss for Russia, which leads back to the great irony mentioned earlier. If not for the Ukraine war that Putin started, Russia's leader wouldn't have taken his eye off the ball in Armenia. When Azerbaijan attacked, Russia would have been in a better position to defend its ally, thus maintaining a relationship that could have continued for decades. The irony is that Putin's desperate attempt to return Ukraine to what amounts to its former Soviet status has cost him two nations that he was able to control, albeit indirectly. Putin's overreach has led Armenia and Azerbaijan into the arms of the West. And wasn't it preventing Western influence from spreading in Eastern Europe that was one of Putin's key motivators for the Ukraine war in the first place? This was a massive miscalculation by Russia's leader, as his grip on the former Soviet bloc has been further loosened. Worse yet for Putin, this is a trend that's emerging all over the areas of the world where Russia had great influence in the very recent past. Syria is lost to Russia, as already mentioned. As far back as January 2023, the Interpreter was reporting that Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan and Kazakhstan were all either trying to maintain neutrality or were actively pulling away from Moscow's grasp, all thanks to the Ukraine war. The prestige that once came with having Russia as an ally has fallen away, and it's all thanks to the Ukraine war. After all, it's not just Russia's inability to offer the direct security guarantees that it promised to countries like Armenia. Just imagine a country that fell under the Russian Federation's influence before Putin launched his invasion. Before February 2022, such a country was confident because Russia maintained one of the world's strongest militaries. Nobody outside of the US and China could stand up to it in a straight fight. So of course, Russia's guarantees seemed solid. Then the Ukraine invasion happened. And rather than completing the invasion in days, as Putin thought he would, Russia got mired in a years-long war that has cost it over 1 million soldiers and proven beyond doubt that Russia is a paper tiger. Would you want to throw your hat in with Russia after seeing all of that? Probably not. And that's the attitude that many of the nations Russia once influenced are now taking. Of course, Russia still has allies. Iran, North Korea and China are all among them, though these relationships are transactional. All three are providing Russia with things that it needs, including weapons, and it's practically a guarantee that they'll be calling in favors if the Ukraine war ends up going Russia's way in the end. So even among Russia's staunchest allies, Putin's influence is waning by the day. Russia's global standing has been damaged, perhaps forever. Armenia and Azerbaijan's peace deal is just the latest blow to Putin's global influence. The only caveat in all of this is that the peace deal has been signed but not yet ratified. However, it would take something insane for that deal to fall through at this stage, especially with the US involvement. Putin has been officially dumped. There's not a thing he can do about it other than realize that Russia is no longer the attractive partner it once was. Still, Russia has at least one ally on which it can rely to come calling whenever Putin whistles. That ally is Belarus, and something dark is unfolding in that country right now as Russia is sending missiles right to NATO's border. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show if you want more analysis of the latest developments in global geopolitics.